webinar, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you a little bit tonight. We're going to talk about some ranchers' rules of thumb and kind of talk about was Grandpa right. And really, the way that this ranchers' rules of thumb got started for me is that as I've been presenting around the country, invariably people will raise their hand and give me rules of thumb that their grandpa or their mom or their aunt or uncle sort of had developed on the ranch, and it took me a while, but I finally decided to start writing those down, and then we went out and asked some other producers to share some rules of thumb with us, and we ended up with a little over 6 pages of rules of thumb, and it keeps growing as we're doing these presentations. And so I just kind of wanted to talk about these rules of thumb, and some of them are just fun ones, and we'll share some of those tonight, and then some of them are more serious, and we'll talk about those as well. I also need to thank the USDA Risk Management Agency. They are the grant sponsor of that allows the funding for this project to do these webinars and to travel around and do the workshops. So I appreciate them, and again, I appreciate Nebraska Cattlemen for joining up on this webinar. So with that, I think we'll get started. And I always like to start, maybe, there we go. I always like to start with this little perspective here. It says, take care of the land and it will take care of you, meaning always do what is best for the land and cash flow will be there. But if you put cash flow ahead of the land, you'll likely go broke and end up teaching in some university. So, I teach at a university, so you can kind of take a lot of the things I say with a grain of salt tonight because, obviously I'm a university teacher, but I thought that was a good one to get started with, poke a little fun at myself and talk about some others. So another one that I kind of like to start with, and it's just kind of a fun one to think about. It says, if you're sitting in a pickup waiting for a cow to have her calf, park sideways to the cow and try and act nonchalantly disinterested. If the pickup is facing the distraught cow, she regards the headlights as eyes staring at her. So I've kind of shared this one around the country as I've been doing these workshops this winter, and I get a lot of questioning looks at me when I share this one. I've only had a few that kind of agreed with it. Most of them were pretty skeptical. I think one of the interesting things is the way that we manage cattle is different from ranch to ranch. And really what works for some doesn't necessarily work for all. And, as we kind of get going, we'll get into some more serious rules of thumb now. And the way that we're going to talk about those rules of thumb is using the Wyoming Ranch Tools website. So you can go out to Google and just Google Wyoming Ranch Tools. That's the easiest way to get to it. But we have several calculators out there designed to help you as producers make decisions. So, if you've listened to me before, you know this, but I truly believe that, as a university employee, I'm not really able to come to your ranch and tell you exactly how you should be ranched. And I can't tell you what color cow to be running. I can't tell you what frame size they should have or when you should be calving, those kinds of things, because you know your resources better than I do. What I can provide for you is some tools to help you make those decisions, and that's really been the focus of my career. And so there's several tools on here to help make those decisions, and we're going to go over several of them tonight, and some of the others we won't. We'll just touch on a little bit. One that doesn't show up on this slide, and it's a new one that folks have been using quite a bit this fall, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from. We have a cull cow marketing calculator on the website now, and so you can look at marketing your cull cows, and if you want to put some feed on them, put them on corn stalks, those sorts of things to look at different market timing ideas. The calculator's there to help you look at a break-even price on that cull cow decision. So that's been a pretty popular one here of late, and been pretty successful in terms of producers using it. I will say on this website, it's been a great project to work on and work with producers, and a lot of these calculators were developed specifically from what producers have asked us to develop. So my contact information is on the website. If there are calculators that you think would be useful for you, give me a call, let me know, send me an email, and I can work on those calculators. And hopefully the site continues to grow and become more useful to producers. Certainly, it's grown quite a bit over the last several years, and we're up to about 3,000 users now annually, which is small compared to Google or Facebook, I guess, but big for the Wyoming Ranch Tools site. So with that, we'll move on to some serious rules of thumb. So the first serious rule of thumb that I've heard and kind of heard it all over, and that is a cow is worth the price of 2 steer calves. And really, more specifically, this would be a bred heifer is worth the price of 2 steer calves. So in terms of this one, it's a rule of thumb that's been used a lot. I've heard it as I've talked to producers. Everybody shakes their head from Idaho to Missouri this year in terms of producers we've talked to, and kind of agrees that this is a rule of thumb that's out there. But I'm not sure it's a great rule of thumb to use. And I guess I'll kind of cut to the chase in terms of all of these rules of thumb I'm going to share. I think a lot of them were developed by really good cattlemen when they were developed, but they were developed for a specific set of marketing circumstances and resources, and during a specific time in the cattle industry. And I don't think when these good cattlemen developed these rules, they necessarily expected them to last forever, and that we should just use them forever. So I think maybe better than using some of these rules is to look at some tools like on our website anyway, or calculators on, Nebraska has some great calculators out there too, to help producers look at these sorts of things. But I think that's probably a better way to go. So, this idea that a bred heifer is worth the price of 2 steer calves, it might be okay in an average year. I think it's definitely overpriced in high markets and underpriced in low markets. And I'm going to talk to you on the next couple of slides about cow maintenance costs and what they could really mean. So 2014, 2 550-pound steers were worth $3,245. Now, if we look back with hindsight, we know that we shouldn't have paid $3,200 for bred heifers. It just doesn't pencil out. I don't like to point fingers, but there were a lot of us that did buy heifers at that price, or a lot of producers that did buy heifers at that price in 2014, and certainly it didn't pencil out. So using that sort of rule of thumb in 2014 certainly didn't work. In 2016, maybe that was an average year where it might have made some sense. But I'm going to show you on the next couple of slides that cow maintenance costs probably makes more of a difference in terms of how much an individual ranch should be paying for their bred heifers than steer prices. So this is our first calculator I was going to show you. It's this cow cost calculator. It was developed by Dr. John Ritten and Steve Paisley, Brian Lee, and myself. Dr. Ritten is with the Ag and Applied Economics department at UW, and was gracious to help us on this calculator. And the way this calculator works is over here in these yellow squares, you enter information like your annual cow costs, your sell weight of calves, calf price, cull cow weight, cull cow price, discount rate. Another way to think about this discount rate is a return on your investment. So in this example, I have it in there as 5. So that means I want a 5% return on my investment when I purchase these cows. And then what we calculate for you over here in the brown numbers is based on the number of calves that cow will have in her lifetime. She's worth, if we look at this center set of numbers, that's under constant cattle prices. So in this example, if we thought a cow that we bought was going to have 3 more calves in her lifetime, she would be worth about $1,867 to us. If we thought she was going to have 5 calves, that's, she's worth $2,367. Now that first column of numbers is if you think the price is declining year over year, and the last column of numbers if you think the price is increasing year over year. So this can work for if you're buying short-term cows that you're trying to get, 1 or 2 calves out of, you can use this, or you can use it, for bred heifers. And a lot of times When I'm talking to producers, we overestimate how many calves in a lifetime our average bred heifer is going to have. The national average is just over 4. So a lot of times I like to look at that 5 number, and I want you to look at that 5 number in terms of this cow maintenance cost, or your annual cow cost per cow. So right now, she's worth 2,367 to this producer that's got a $500 annual cow cost. Now that's a pretty darn low annual cow cost for right now. I was in Missouri last week, and Missouri Extension shared some numbers with some of the producers in the workshop, and they showed their last year's average annual cow cost for Northwest Missouri, and it was $940 per cow, so significantly higher than that 500. Nebraska's, I don't, depending on where you're at in Nebraska, your cow cost could be anywhere from 450 to probably that $900 mark. And it doesn't take too many producers to have a $150 to $200 spread between producers in a room in terms of what their cow costs are. But this example is for $500. So I'm going to show you on the next slide, what if our annual cow costs are $750 instead of $500? Then how much is that cow worth to us if she's going to have 5 more calves in her lifetime? And just kind of pay attention to that number. So if we look at a cow now that's costing us $750 a year to raise, she's really only worth $1,285 for us, given the rest of these conditions holding true. So in terms of what they're worth to you, you need to as best you can estimate what your cow costs are, and then estimate these other numbers that we're asking for, to get a number that works best for you. And I always tell producers, if you're going to use this calculator, use it first, kind of get an idea of a starting point in terms of what those bred heifers or bred cows are worth to you. Then go out looking for a set of cows to buy. Don't fall in love with a set of cows. Go buy them and then come use these numbers and mess around with the calculator till it tells you made a good buy. Because I have had producers I work with quite a bit do that, but that's not the right way to do it. So we had to play around with the numbers quite a bit to make it look like it was a good buy. So that's kind of that first serious rule of thumb. We'll move on to some lighthearted ones now for a minute. So this is one I think really lasts the test of time. It says a boy is a boy, 2 boys are half a boy, and 3 boys are no boys at all. I think that one, certainly in my case growing up, I worked on my dad's ranch, and my brothers are a little older than me. Some of you know my brother Dylan. He worked there in Nebraska for several years, but I was there on the ranch by myself during high school during most of the year, and then my dad would hire cousins to come in and work for us in the summertime, and my production went down pretty drastically when those cousins came in and gave me something to do besides work. So these are some rules that got sent with kind of horses as a theme. It says, don't keep kicking a dead horse. If something isn't working, kick the habit. I think that's a reasonable one to follow. A good horse is never a bad color, and gentle is a pretty color on horses and cows. We also received another rule of thumb that fat is a pretty color on cows. So we've kind of received several of those rules of thumb. And I kind of like this last one too. Never approach a bull from the front, a horse from the rear, or an idiot from any direction. So the next serious rule of thumb I want to talk about is this pasture value rule of thumb. And this came from a producer in central South Dakota. He said that he was working on this rule of thumb that lately 5 months worth of rented summer pasture should cost 1/3 of what a steer calf is worth at weaning time. If that calf is worth $900, 1/3 of that would be $300. $300 divided by 5 months would be $60 a month. Now, as I've shared this rule around, almost unanimously, what people think of this rule is they would like the number of this individual so that they could rent him out some pasture, right? So this rule probably is definitely overpriced in terms of pasture, and I think it's probably the wrong way to go about it. I mean, I think it was a worthy thing for him to sort of think about how much pasture is worth, but it's probably not the way I would approach this. Now, this is one of the most common questions I get. Every year, I get several people giving me a call and asking me what the going price for pasture is in my area, or in Wyoming, really. And it's the problem when people ask me that question is they're really resistant to tell me how much they're paying or how much they're charging, but they want to know what their neighbors are paying and charging, right? And so I'm really resistant to make those numbers, or sort of kind of come up with those numbers, because a lot of times I'll when I make that number up, or not necessarily make it up, but when I give my best estimate, that sometimes sets the market for our area, and that's not a good thing for the extension guy to be setting the market for the cattleman. But even as I'm talking about this today, a couple of weeks ago I gave this presentation in Wyoming, and about 2 days later, I got an email from somebody that said they really enjoyed the presentation. They really wanted to use some of the calculators on my website, but they had one important question they need to ask me right now, and that was, well, how much is pasture going for these days, right? So even when I kind of tell people that it's really tough for me to come up with that number, it's still a number you guys really want to know and really want to manage from. So one of the ways that we've approached this is develop this AUM value calculator, where you can enter in some information about yearlings going into your pasture, or pairs, depending. And we're going to look at a yearling and a pairs example here tonight. But you would enter some information about yearlings going in terms of how much they weigh going in, and how much you're projecting them to weigh going out. In this example, I'm mimicking that 5 months from the rule of thumb. And so I said, we're going to put these yearlings in steer calves at 700 pounds, and we're going to pull them off in 5 months, and they're going to weigh 1,000 pounds. Fairly aggressive. That's 300 pounds gain in 5 months, which is pretty good. Most people will be fairly happy with that. And I put them in at a market price of $1.45. And so the calculator then adjusts, as those steer calves get heavier, it adjusts that market price appropriately in terms of a market slide, and generates a total value created per animal unit month. And so in this example, we're looking at a 5-month period. And so we're saying that we could generate $235.71 per 5-month period with these yearlings on there per head, essentially. And so, maybe a fair split of that, or one of the most common splits is a 1/3 split going to the landowner, where they get about $77.79 in that 5 months. And that really depends on who's doing the fencing, who's riding the cattle, who's doing the mineral program, who's taking care of water and irrigation. All those sorts of things can enter into the negotiation of how much the landowner gets versus how much the cattle owner gets. But in this example, I've said that, in a 5 months time frame, with this sort of set of yearlings on there, that's worth about $16 to $17 a month as a starting point anyway in a negotiation. So nowhere close to that $60 a month from the rule of thumb. And this varies in terms of region, in terms of your expected gain and some things like that. But it's a good starting point to get at in terms of negotiating a pasture lease with someone. So let's look at a pairs example. So in this pairs example, I'm going to put calves in there, 100-pound calves, so fairly new calves, sort of right after branding type calves. So I know that you guys in Nebraska don't brand everywhere, but we would brand, fairly early on here in the spring, and then put those calves out onto summer pasture. And so if we were looking at a scenario like that, putting those calves out there at 100 pounds and pulling them off at 500 pounds, so putting about 400 pounds of weight on them, then we could grade about $540 per cow. So that's about $177.91 for that 1/3 share to the landowner, or about $32 to $35 a month type of deal to that landowner. So still significantly below that $60 level, but a different way to approach that question of, how much pasture is worth, really looking at how much value are you creating while your animals are out there. All right, so back to some, I guess, a little bit more lighthearted rules of thumb. This one, these were some that were sent to us about dogs. It said, oddly enough, most here have the same name. Get in the pickup, you son of a, and that was all the further they went. They didn't fill out the last word there, so you have to fill that out. A good cow dog can replace a couple of good hens sometimes. I saw one once about 1957 or so. I've got a buddy that travels with me and does a lot of these workshops, and he loves his ranch dogs, and he gets really ouchy whenever I share these rules of thumb because he really likes his ranch dogs. I think the next one's pretty interesting. It came from a producer that I know out in central Utah. He said, Grandpa always used to say, kids, horses, and dogs, you get out of them exactly what you put into them. I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. And this last one was kind of interesting. If you think you're in charge, try bossing someone else's dog around. I was in Montana earlier this year, and one of the producers raised his hand and said, I can't even boss my own dog around. So, we have to think about that as we're thinking about it. So another serious rule of thumb here, and this one came from a producer in Elko, Nevada. We were talking about marketing calves, and it says the number of calves you sell is more valuable than the weight. And really what he was saying is that his dad had always told him that, they should run smaller cows, try and run a few more cows and sell more calves rather than heavier calves. And so does that make sense? Well, certainly for a lot of you guys in Nebraska, it may or might not make sense depending on your operation. I think it's a complicated question we have to ask ourselves in terms of what's the right cow size for us to be running. And it is one of the more emotional questions when we talk to producers in terms of what the right cow size, because you guys don't necessarily like it if somebody tells you you're running the wrong cow size. And so, trying to figure that balance out is really important. It's kind of interesting. There's some folks at Wyoming working on a research paper right now looking at this. And I was asked to review that paper, and I felt like they even took a little bit too simplistic of an approach at looking at how much, at the ideal cow size for individual ranches. So it's a little tougher question than some of the others. It did surprise us that we got this rule of thumb out of Elko, because in Elko, those cows spend at least a portion of the year on the BLM or Forest Service. And the BLM or Forest Service doesn't care how much your cows weigh when they count them onto your permit. So if you were trying to, increase your carrying capacity by having smaller cows, the BLM and Forest Service just don't care. I mean, they care, but they don't have that in their ability to give you more cows on the operation. So, whether you're putting elephants on there or miniature Angus, they're going to count numbers, and you get, 100. If your allotments for 120 head, you're going to get 120 head regardless of what they weigh. So that surprised us a little, and it makes that decision even more difficult in ranches that are on those public lands. But for you guys, for most of you, where you can manage your pastures and really manage, cow size and carrying capacity, I think it's a great question to ask yourself. But I think the answer is going to be different for every operation. And as you ask yourself that question, keeping in mind this partial budget approach and asking yourself all four of these questions when you're thinking about something as complicated as changing cow size. What new or additional costs will be incurred, what current income will be lost or reduced, what new or additional income will be received, and what current costs will be reduced or eliminated. So if you ask yourself those four questions, each time you're thinking about making a change on your ranch, you get better at making decisions on the ranch. We have a calculator, to help you with those. So, we ask you those four questions. What's my additional cost? What's my reduced income? What's my additional income? And what's my reduced cost? And at the bottom, we calculate a net income or loss for you. Now, if that number is positive, doesn't mean always that you're going to make that change. Certainly, you can add a lot of risk. You can add a lot of labor. All kinds of stuff can go into that net positive number. So as a producer, you still have to decide, that this number is a starting point in your decision. It doesn't necessarily make the decision for you. Now, if that number is a negative number, it probably is really helping to make that decision for you. So here's one. says if a bunch of cow-calf pairs won't cross a barrier, such as a bridge or slippery ice, rope a calf around its neck. When it bellers, its mother will come and bring many of her bovine friends with her. Pull the calf across the barrier, and the rest will follow. So, if we were at a low-stress cattle handling workshop, this would probably be a no-no. But some producers can make this work. Some of you, as I've presented this around, I've had a lot of producers shake their head yes, that this can work. When we were in a group in Utah, one of the producers raised his hand and said, I don't have to rope them calves. He says, I just go out there with a bucket of grain and shake it in front of my cows, and they'll cross that bridge. And one of his neighbors said, if I shake a bucket in front of my cows, I'm going to be, a day and a half picking them up, because he ran his cows out on the West Desert there in Utah, and they see them, 2-3 times a year if they're lucky. And so those cows were a little bit wilder, and the other guy was more of a farmer feeder. So, a lot of these sorts of rules of thumb really depend on your own operation and how you manage cattle. Some economic rules of thumb that we've received. You can owe for cows, land, and equipment. If you owe for 1 out of the 3, that is okay. 2 out of 3 is tough, and 3 out of 3 is a recipe for disaster. I think that one's really true, and a lot of bankers that have sat through this program have all shaken their heads with that one. The time to prepare for the lean years is pretty much always. And one of my favorite ones, because I'm an economist by training, is sign the backs of checks, not the front. Now, I was in Montana, and one of the producers said that, Dad always said that we leave the ranch spending money a lot more than we leave the ranch making money. And he kind of went on to say that, they only sell calves once or twice a year, but they're spending money every time they go off the ranch. They're buying feed, they're buying groceries, supplies, fuel, all that kind of stuff. And so he thought I should change this rule of thumb to make sure that the backs of checks are larger than the fronts. So some risk management rules that we've got: never sell hay. The best insurance is a fat cow going into the winter. Manage for the 8 normal years and you'll do fine. Cut a fat hog in the 2 abnormal years, and don't squat with your spurs on. I think all of these, in terms of risk management rules, have some relevance. Some of them don't. Certainly a lot of you are looking at that never sell hay and thinking, well, if my business is selling hay, that probably doesn't make sense. But this came from a guy, sort of in this southwest Wyoming area where hay can be pretty scarce sometimes. And so he kind of took the approach that it was better for him to store hay and use it when he needed it than to sell hay. Certainly still a pretty conservative approach to risk management there. So far, all the rules that I've given you have been directly as we received them from producers, either in workshops or producers texted me after workshops and told me, or came up to me after workshops and told me, or sent them in to me online, but they were all direct quotes from producers. But these 2 rules of thumb come from me, and they're the only ones that are going to come from me tonight. So you don't have to get too much of my philosophy. But in terms of risk management, I think, if you use crop insurance products to mitigate risk, not as a speculative money-making strategy, you're going to be better off. And the other one I really like to stress with producers, as we're going to talk a little bit about some of these risk management tools, is, buying crop or livestock insurance every year may not be wise, but analyzing your options every year is critical. And for a lot of you, it will never make sense to utilize these products. For some of you, depending on cash flow and some issues like that, it could really make a lot of sense to utilize these products in some years. But I think it's really critical to really think about risk management in terms of one of the planning things that you do every year, and at least look at your options every year. Again, like I said, there's a lot of you that will never exercise that option, and I think that's okay, but just be aware of what your options are, I think, is important. And some of the products I'm going to just talk to you tonight a little bit about come from the USDA Risk Management Agency. Certainly, again, they're our grant sponsor, and we appreciate that. I like to start off my insurance talk like this. When you're buying insurance for this truck, back in 2015 or 2014 when cattle prices went crazy, we all went out and bought a new truck, maybe not a Ford, maybe it was some other flavor, and some of us didn't buy new trucks, but a lot of new trucks got bought. And the very next thing we do is put insurance on it. But when we buy this truck and buy insurance for it, is this what we're hoping for, right? Are we hoping for a wreck? Well, unfortunately, when I talk to a lot of producers that use crop insurance or livestock insurance, they're disappointed when they don't get payouts. But a lot of times, what that really means is they were hoping for a wreck. Because sometimes when we don't get payouts, it means we got rain, the market was good, some other things like that. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing when we don't get a payout. A payout usually means we've had some sort of a wreck. I'm going to talk to you just real quickly about 3 programs, and we're just going to touch on them briefly tonight, just to kind of give you an overview, just really to get you thinking about these as options in your business, and nothing more. So we're going to talk about pasture, range, and forage insurance, livestock risk protection, LRP, and whole farm revenue protection, WFRP. And certainly, I don't like, I'm certainly not an insurance salesman. I'm just here to kind of explain these programs to you and get you thinking about them, whether you're interested in them or not. And I don't like sort of taking advantage of situations, but certainly the whole farm revenue protection could have made a lot of sense this year for you folks in Nebraska. Things are pretty tough there. I realize there's some other programs that are going to help you out too. But this one, had you had this in place, could have really helped you out in terms of guaranteeing some of that revenue when you've got some losses going in there. And so, again, I don't, like I said, I don't like really capitalizing on those sorts of situations, but it's something to think about in terms of managing risk going forward. So just a little bit of an overview of pasture, range, and forage. It's a way to insure grass for either forage, grazing, or mowing. They're area plans. It's not individual coverage. There's no loss adjustment records they have to do. It is pretty timely payments, and it does not reward poor management practices. So that's one of the things we kind of like about this product is it's really about whether it rains in your grid or not, and not necessarily whether how you manage that property, whether you get a premium payment or not. You can use it for grazing or haying in terms of doing that, and it's based on a rainfall index. The grid is approximately 17 by 17 miles, and you have to select 2-month periods in the year when you do that. It's really important to work with a good insurance agent. Just like you guys need to find a good banker, a good accountant, a good feed salesman. Find somebody that you can work with and you trust. As we've talked to producers who have had different experiences with this product, some of them are really happy with it and it's worked really well for them. Some of them haven't been so happy with it. We had a producer in one of the driest counties in the West, certainly last year, that wasn't very happy with this. And one of the reasons was the insurance salesman that he was working with really took a very risky approach to insurance, and he didn't get any payment on one of the driest years in record in his area. But it was because they took a really risky sort of speculative approach to it. And so, like I said, find somebody that you can trust, just like you would a feed salesman or a banker or something like that, to work with you on these types of products. Just a little overview on LRP. It's a livestock risk protection. It gives you the ability to put a floor price on your calves, fed cattle, or lambs, or swine if you've got any. But we're going to really focus on feeder cattle tonight. Feeder cattle or fed cattle. It establishes a floor selling price based on the CME index. So essentially, you are able to purchase it's similar to an option. Only options are fixed in size at 50,000 pound contracts. This LRP is really flexible. It can be anywhere from 1 to 1,000 head. You can get 2 different policies as any one individual, so you can insure up to 2,000 head. And it's really fairly straightforward in how it works. You're buying insurance to set a floor price at that CME index. If the index goes below that price, you receive a payment. If it doesn't, you don't. So one of the interesting things about this product too is that it works really a lot more straightforward for cow-calf producers that are not trying to manage those 50,000 pound contracts type of deal. So, when I talk to producers about how they might use this, I certainly think it can help you increase some market power. As we're thinking about it, when we get ready to sell our calves, there is a lot of pressure on us to get them sold. We've put a year's worth of labor into them, a year's worth of expenses, and there's a lot of pressure to get them sold. And if the price is going down, we're still generally going to go get them sold because it's better to take a little bit of a loss than more of a loss if that price continues to go down. So if you're able to set this floor price, that takes some of that pressure off. I'm not going to say it takes it all off, but it does take some of that pressure off and allows you to kind of negotiate a little bit in terms of trying to hold out for a market rally and those sorts of things. So one of the things that consistently, as we've done these workshops over the years that we've got from producers is it is really hard to visualize what's happening with this LRP insurance tool. So we developed a LRP visual evaluation tool. It can be found on our website, masterstockman.com. And if you find this LRP visual evaluation tool, when you go to it, it looks like this, where it shows you this graph of sort of what's going to happen based on the information you provided. So we have up at the top, we have a direct link to RMA's website where they provide you with the LRP coverage prices, rates, and actual ending values. I think it's easier to find that link on our website than it is RMA's website. You're certainly welcome to go straight to RMA's website, but if you're interested in using ours, it's easy to get there. So when you find that information, you can fill in the information you need here, and this generates what it would look like. If you're looking at if cash price ends up at $1.40, yours in this example, you would still get $1.5434 essentially. If cash price ends up here at $1.70, you get to sell your calves at $1.70, and it costs you, in this example, $4.10 to purchase this LRP contract. Now, in the past, LRP has been subsidized at 13%. So the government pays 13% of the premium, and the producer pays 87% of the premium. RMA has decided to increase that subsidy. So starting in July, they announced that subsidy will raise from 25 to 40%. Now, they didn't tell us exactly what it's going to be in that release. So in July, we'll find out in terms of that between 25 and 40%. But if the government's willing to subsidize that premium at that level, it certainly makes this product even a little bit more interesting in terms of something I would look at on a year-to-year basis. Again, it might not be the right thing for you each year, but I think it's worth looking at each year. The last thing on this page that we've done is we've calculated your local basis. So we have it for Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Montana, Texas, Wyoming. I've got Missouri done too, and it'll be adding here pretty soon. But it calculates, based on that CME index, what is your local price expected, local expected price to be, so you can kind of manage that risk as you're thinking about it. So on our website, we also show you a seasonal price index to help you get an idea where price is going. And then we show you how to get the information off of the RMA's coverage price, rates, and actual ending values report where you find that information to plug into our calculator. So this visual tool, we'll keep updating it. We're going to keep adding additional states for the basis file. Certainly Nebraska's already in there, so you don't have to worry about that. We're finalizing a probability visual that'll help you look at a curve in terms of what your expected probability is to get a premium versus not. And then we're working on a price slide adjustment. And that all should be updated. If you're wanting to follow sort of the latest, you can follow us on Facebook at masterstockman.consulting.com. We just use this to let you know when we update this tool. We'll also let you know when we're doing new workshops and those kinds of things. That's really all that's there for. But we've got several folks following us just to get those updates, and you're welcome to do that as well. So the last one I'm going to talk about real quick tonight is this whole farm revenue protection. It provides a risk management safety net, and it allows you, the insurance plan is tailored for any farm with up to $8.5 million in insured revenue, including some specialty crops, right? Both crops and livestock. So it could work for you as livestock producers. In terms of revenue protection, it's for commodities you produce during the insurance period, whether they are sold or not, commodities you buy for resale, and all commodities on the farm except timber, forest, and forest products, and animals for sport, show, or pets. So, club calves probably do not fall into this, but everything else in terms of livestock probably does. There's some replant coverage in this policy as well that allows you to replant some of your crops if you've got some issues with them. It's really tailored best for diversified livestock producers like a lot of you would be, where you've got some crops and livestock. The more products that you sell, the rates go down on this product, so makes some sense. But certainly, like a year like this where you've had some livestock losses, you've had some crop losses, revenues are going to be off. Certainly this product is something that could have been used to manage some of that risk. Hopefully, you guys aren't going to see another sort of set of conditions like this for a long time. We can all hope that, but if you're interested in managing some of that risk, this might be something to think about. So how do you get started on these programs? Well, we do have a couple of webinars out there. If you go to our website, again, it's the RMA Crop Insurance 101 webinars. They're about 30-minute webinars that walk you through step by step where to find information on RMA's website and what kind of information is available to help you if you're interested in any of these products. So that those webinars are available for anyone, again, free to use, and they should be fairly helpful in helping you get started. The other thing, I'll stress it again, I said it earlier, but find yourself a good agent. That's as important as anything you do, and you can find that on the RMA's website. They have an agent locator. And then one last rule of thumb, keep your thumbs out of your dallies, said Stumpy at the branding. So I do need to submit evaluation information for the program that we're working on. So I have 4 questions for you. Question 1, I plan to use tools or concepts from this program on my ranch. Either strongly agree, neutral, disagree. I could have added strongly disagree, but I've done these programs in, 12 different states over the last several years, and I've never had anybody choose E, strongly disagree. If you want to, you can certainly do that, but most folks are somewhere on this spectrum. So if you can just text me, 1A or 1B, whatever you think, and 2A, 2B, 2C, whatever, if you can just text me those answers for those 4 questions. And for those of you who are going to be watching this program as a recording, certainly I'd love to get your feedback and evaluation in terms of what you think in terms of value of this webinar, even as a recording, and you can text me at any time your responses to this, and I'd appreciate that. So with that, I guess we can probably open it up to a couple of questions. If we have any questions, you can unmute your mic and ask a question, or type it into the chat box, and I'll give you just a minute to think about that um, before we wrap up. So any questions before we wrap up tonight? All right. Well, my contact information is on that website. I guess you have my direct contact information with this cell phone number here. So if you have questions for me, give me a call. I like to work on these types of problems. It helps me in terms of understanding ranching business even better. And I'm happy to help you as you go through some of these issues, or just be a sounding board. It's something I'm willing to do. So with that, I thank everybody for attending tonight, and hopefully you'll find this useful. And I appreciate being here tonight.